Preparing for numeracy questions. Preparing for numeracy testing, or becoming more familiar with calculations you may need in the workplace, is more than just practicing question after question. It includes correctly understanding the question that is being asked, filtering all the information given so you can extract what you need, and developing an intuition or feel for numbers so that you can have a sense of whether your answer is correct. As you identified in the previous step, you will also need to refresh techniques that you may have learnt a long time ago and develop ways to help you work more quickly. This step will give you an insight into how you may do this. Examine this example, which contains some text and a line graph. A retailer is planning which fruit to stock in 2015 and is looking at historical profit data as presented in the graph. The question is given below the graph with 5 possible answers. Rather than try to answer the question right now, start by thinking about what you would do if you were to answer it. Do not worry if you have difficulty in working with graphs, as we will be covering this later in the course. Each point on the graph represents the profit for a particular fruit in a particular year. All the points for one fruit are in the same colour, and the points are joined with the same coloured line. Strictly speaking, the points should not be joined with lines, as the graph is a plot of discrete points. However, in common usage, points are often linked with a line to highlight an upwards or downwards trend, and you will meet graphs drawn like this in many employers' tests. Please note, though, that you cannot infer interim points, say halfway through a year, from a graph of this kind. We will return to this issue again in week 3. You may read the profit for a particular fruit in a particular year by looking at the profit on the vertical axis, which is given in pounds. For example, the profit from the sale of oranges in 2011 is £100,000, and the profit from the sale of strawberries in 2013 is £50,000. Examining the graph, you can see that the profits from sales of fruit has varied up and down over the years 2011 through 2014. The profit for some fruits have varied greatly, for example strawberries, and for others it is more consistent, for example oranges. To understand the data better, you may like to ask yourself other questions. For example, which fruit in which year achieved the maximum profit over all years? Apples in 2012, and the least? Strawberries in 2013. The question asked is, which fruit contributed the least profit over the 4 years? On a numeracy test, you will usually be asked to select one of 5 answers that are provided. These are displayed below the question, labelled here A, B, C, D and E. So how would you set about answering this question? As in the previous steps, you need to ask yourself a set of questions. What exactly is the question asking? What data do I have? What calculations do I need to perform? Do I have all the data I need? Am I comfortable with doing the calculations? Remember, for now you have not been asked to do the question. Could you think of any areas where you may be able to save time? The first step would be to read and think about the question carefully to understand what is being asked. You may also wish to look at the possible responses to see if they offer any further information. In this case, you are being asked to select which one of the fruits has contributed the least profit over the 4 years. As already discussed, the points on the graph show the profit for each fruit in each year. So you will need to perform a calculation using the data in the graph to determine which is the fruit with the lowest profit from sales over the 4 years. You will need to read the points from the graph for each fruit in turn and for each year and make a note of this data. Be careful to be accurate. Then you will need to add together each year's profit data for each fruit in turn, so you obtain a total profit for each individual fruit. All the data you need is given in the graph. For example, this is the profit from sale of oranges, the points on the orange line. The total profit from sale of oranges is £420,000. You will need to do this for each of the 5 fruits and then compare the totals to determine which is the lowest. The fruit with the lowest total will be your answer. In summary, the numeracy skills needed are understanding what the question is asking, reading data from graphs, addition, comparing numbers to determine the lowest. What about working more quickly? As we have already mentioned, in a numeracy test it is important to work as accurately and as quickly as possible, as you will normally have a fixed time in which to answer as many questions as possible. In the workplace you may have the luxury of more time. However, you may be making decisions under pressure, so it is helpful to develop techniques for working more quickly without sacrificing accuracy. We look briefly here at 2 areas where you could save time, and will return to these concepts again as the course progresses. So where could you have saved time answering this question? One way is to see if it were necessary to carry out all the calculations. If you look at the given answers, you will notice that bananas are not an option you could pick. It is therefore not necessary to read any data, nor to perform any calculations for bananas. This data is therefore superfluous. A technique you need to develop is to be able to exclude data that you do not need to work with. Questions on employers' numeracy tests are often very wordy and may contain data you do not need. Remember, you are being tested on your ability to perform calculations in context. There is also an option cannot say. As we have seen, you will not always be given sufficient data in the question to be able to come to an answer. Remember that numeracy testing is not only measuring your ability to perform calculations, but is also testing your ability to filter numerical information and to interpret results. Sometimes when you cannot answer a question, it is because it cannot be answered, and you will need to develop the confidence to say this. A second area where you could have saved time requires a more intuitive understanding of number and a greater familiarity with how questions are asked. Do not worry if you do not have this yet, as it is something you will develop as you follow this course. If you examine the lines on the graph relative to one another, you will see that in each year all profit points for apples are higher than those for blueberries. Compare the green and purple lines. The profit total over 4 years for apples will therefore be higher than the profit total for blueberries. The same applies to oranges. Compare the orange and purple lines. The profit total for oranges will be higher than blueberries, but lower than apples. All corresponding data points for oranges are lower than those for apples. You have been asked for the fruit that contributes the least or lowest profit, so it will therefore not be necessary to calculate the profit totals for either apples or oranges. Therefore, options A and B cannot be correct. This is not the case for strawberries or bananas, where there are some profit points that fall below those of blueberries. Without performing the profit calculations, it is not possible to determine which one of blueberries, strawberries or bananas have the lowest profit totals. In this example, it would therefore only have been necessary to read the data and calculate totals for 2 fruits, blueberries and strawberries. Bananas not being a possible response has already been excluded. So, as you work through this course and practice numeracy questions, you should ask yourself, what is the question asking? What data do I have? What data do I need? What data is superfluous? What calculations are needed to answer the question? Do I know how to do these? Have I obtained the correct answer? How would I check my answer? How could I have saved work and therefore time? As you work through the steps in this course, you will learn how to read questions and make sure that you understand what is being asked. You will see how to filter all the information that is given so that you focus only on the data that you need. You will have the opportunity to practice the different calculations and techniques that you will need, and we will provide many resources that you can use if you need further practice. You will learn techniques for checking what you do and will explore how to work more quickly and avoid calculations that are not necessary. This will develop your feel for number and your mathematical confidence. If you are comfortable with reading graphs, you may have attempted to answer this question, and if so, as you will see from the table, the fruit which has contributed the least profit over the 4 years 2011 to 2014 is strawberries, and the answer is therefore D.